Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Vibhuti Patel, Head of the Department of Economics of SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. Today we will be discussing the historical roots of the feminist consciousness in the 19th century social reform movement. We all know that social reform movement was a very important mark in the historical development of Indian women. Historically, Indian women's role in the family, community and society at large was determined by interplay of several forces such as caste and gender-based division of labor, class background, geographic location, ethnic origin of particular community or a tribe. For example, women dominated by Aryan culture had to face far more rigid control over their sexuality, fertility and labor. Women in the Dravidian culture had to face relatively less ferocious patriarchy over the last 5,000 years. Indian women's status has also been influenced by various religions such as Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, Christianity and Zoroastrianism. Religious reform movement between the 12th century and the 16th century, which was also gave rise to liberation theology, namely Bhakti movement and Sufism, brought women's concerns to the fore, such as like saint poetesses such as Mirabai, Lal De, Akka Mahadevi and Bahinabai articulated women's aspirations of personal freedom and creative urge. Now it is very important to understand the genesis of the feminist consciousness and the role that women's organizations have played. In the 19th century, the male social reformers, with blessing of the British administration influenced by Western liberal democratic values, initiated the process of fight against female infanticide, widow burning, segregation of women from the public life, prostitution, begging by the destitute women. They also organized public functions for widow remarriages. As a result, their relatives, their neighbors, community leaders and organized religion boycotted them. In a way, it was a blessing in disguise because their isolation from the petty politics gave them ample time and resources to interact with the power structures to bring about legal reforms and establish educational institutions, shelter homes, training centers for women, from where the first generation of teachers, nurses and other skilled workers came out, and they contributed to the nation building. Many women have played very important role in the social reform movement. Savitribai Phule was the first woman teacher of the modern education, who also played a very important role along with her husband Jyotirao Phule. Both of them started a school for native girls in Pune. They also played a very important role for rehabilitation of pregnant and socially ostracized women. Their children also grew up in their institution. They studied there. Mother was made self-dependent through education and skill, while the child also studied in schools, and Savitribai mentored them. In 1868, they opened the well in their house where untouchables were allowed to draw water. Savitribai had to face enormous form of barbaric humiliation and social boycott by the feudal and regressive forces. In 1885, Ramabai chose prison over marriage as a child bride. She studied to become a doctor. She played pivotal role in establishment of civil hospitals in Pune and Surat. Tarabai Shinde, in the 19th century social reform movement, she played a very important role by publishing her work Stri Purush Tulna, a comparison between women and men. Originally published in Marathi in 1882, and the pamphlet is critique of the upper caste patriarchy based on irrational, illogical double standards for caste-based social hierarchy that subjugated Shudras, Atishudras and women. What we have seen in 1889 is a Pandita Ramabai's rise, a visionary social reformer who started Sharda Sadan, a secular residential school for child widows. During horrifying famine years in Maharashtra, she gave food, shelter, education to several, like nearly 2,000 unfortunate and rejected children, child widows, destitutes and orphans. She was well known for her mission called Pandita Ramabai Mukti Mission. In 1916, Maharshi Karve founded the first women's university of South Asia, namely SNDT Women's University. What we see that movement against sati also was a very important agenda of the social reform movement. Indian male social reformers, they worked towards abolition of sati, parda, child marriages, widow remarriages. Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar dedicated their entire life to stop barbaric custom of widow burning among the upper caste Hindus. As a result, the government had to pass Sati Prohibition Act in 1929. They also promoted widow remarriages. In several parts of India, this movement started. In 1850, Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar proved from the Shastras that the remarriage of widow is allowed in Indian culture. It was a long, difficult journey through debates with the orthodox Pandits. They created turmoil in the society. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar submitted a petition to the Governor General in 1855. A widow remarriage association was started in Madras in 1871 but was short-lived. In 1878, they started a new social reform movement where the organization performed widow remarriages. Social reform movement also fought against female infanticide in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Punjab, and they worked really hard to stop killing of newly born baby girls, which was the custom which was prevalent among the upper caste. The laws criminalizing killing of female infants also were put in place. For rehabilitation of prostitutes also, social workers, social reform movement worked. Notable personalities who fought against this for this reform, they were Jyotiba Phule, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, Maharshi Karve, women like Pandita Ramabai, Sister Nivedita, Rabindranath Tagore's sister Swarna Kumari Devi in Bengal, and they had witnessed rebellion spirits like Madhusudan Datta and Henry. They had invited wrath of the conservative forces. They attacked double standard of sexual morality, and they also provided rehabilitation and refuge to women who were brutalized by the system. Swami Dayananda Saraswati spearheaded Arya Samaj movement. They disowned caste system and prescribed equal treatment to women from all caste backgrounds. Arya Samaj did not impose any duties or obligations to women which could not be applied to men according to the lawgivers. In his monumental book Satyartha Prakash, Dayananda Saraswati insisted that the polygamy, child marriage and seclusion of women are abhorrent practices and must be done away with. He called for compulsory education for boys and girls both. Social reformers also advocated for prohibition of child marriage. In 1860, an act was passed fixing the age of consent at 10. Behram Malbari, who was a Parsi, started campaign in support of the act towards the end of century. He could manage to convince the good number of lawyers, doctors, teachers and general public. They believed that early marriage weakens the physical strength of a nation. It stunts its full growth and development, and it affects the courage and energy of the individuals and brings forth a race of the people weak in strength and determination. When Rakmabai Save, a victim of child marriage, wrote an open letter to Viceroy of India in Times of India, the campaign against child marriage got a massive boost. Rakmabai was married off at the age of 11 to a 19-year-old groom, Dadaji Bhikaji. She, however, continued to live in the house of her widowed mother, Jayanti Bai, and then married assistant surgeon Sakram Arjun. When Dadaji and his family asked Rakmabai to move to his home, she refused and was supported in her choice by her stepfather. This led to a long series of court cases from 1884, and major public debates and discussions on child marriage took place. Rakmabai, in her meantime, she pursued her studies. She wrote letters to the newspapers under pseudonym, a Hindu lady. She won the case, and a lot of public supported her. She studied medicine. In the meantime, Rakmabai pursued her studies, wrote letters to newspapers under the pseudonym of a Hindu woman, Hindu lady. Her case won the support of number of people, and when she expressed her wish to study medicine, a fund was raised for her travel and study medicine at the London School of Medicine. She graduated and returned to India in 1895, becoming one of the first women doctors of our country after Anandibai Joshi, and worked in the women's hospital both in Pune and Surat. When it comes to reflection of new sentiments of social reform in literature, what we saw that in the 19th century, social reform movement were beginning to show its effects, confidence, determination. They was observed in the life and work of some of the women. Novelists like Nirupama Devi or Anurupa Devi, they started getting referred to in the Bengali literary circles. They were even given membership of literary clubs which were eliminated by men. Tagore's novels and short stories are full of women characters who were educated, self-confident, and commanded decision-making power. There were many women who worked for women's cause. For example, Rabindranath Tagore's sister Swarna Kumari Devi, she launched Sakhi Samiti, which with the aim of training widows to learn to teach and thus become most powerful agents of spreading education among women. The Sakhi Samiti organized crafts fair in order to promote women-centric cottage industries, and also by means of developing self-confidence, self-reliance, and also patriotic fervor. Swarna Kumari Devi's daughter Sarla Devi was strikingly rebellious. She wanted to free the quote-unquote cage or quote-unquote prison of home and establish her right to an independent livelihood like men. She started a gymnasium in 1902 where women were trained to use sword and lathi. She can be called the architect of militant nationalism or even a revolutionary terrorism. Similar work was done by Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain for education of Muslim women through establishment of institutions such as Anjuman-e-Islam. The first wave of feminism that we see in the in the post-independence period was marked by the first generation of English educated women's struggles against child marriage, widow burning, female infanticide, efforts for education for women and their voting rights. It impacted only women from the upper caste and upper class. Enormous amount of literature of the time produced by Indian social reformers in Marathi, Hindi, Gujarati, Malayalam, Tamil, Bengali bears witness to their path-breaking efforts. The first generation of English educated empowered women became the foremothers of the new women's movement that we witnessed in the 70s. So in the pre-independence period, most of them channelized their energies in building pioneer women's organizations such as All India Women's Conference, YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA, and Anjuman-e-Islam. The political agent of All India Women's Conference was to fight against child marriage, mobilize public opinion in favor of adult franchise for women, voting rights for women, impart basic skills such as tailoring, embroidery, crockery, hairstyling, child care, folk and classical music and dance, letter writing, etc. among women, so that they become efficient homemakers. The cultural ambience of AIWC suited the needs and aspirations of high caste Hindu women. All for all practical purposes, the Young Women's Christian Association was a multi-religious in terms of its areas of activities, beneficiaries, and though its decision makers happened to be Christian wives of politicians or bureaucrats or professionals and the managerial cadre who were in close proximity to the British rulers. The YWCA provided vocational training courses to groom nurses, typists, secretaries, teachers, and these classes for bakery products, flower arrangement, as well as Western and Indian classical dance and music. Anjuman Trust was committed to the cause of women's education and skill formation with an idea to enable them to become home-based workers. They had to work within the matrix of Parda, the veil. Women office bearers of YWCA had to face outside world with nominal male protection. Many AIWC leaders had their male family members as facilitators. Women leaders of Anjuman Trust, they interacted only with the Muslim community. Differences in eating habits, dress code, language barriers prevented them from collaborative ventures, though their leadership was from a economically better off sections and they were also like politically active. What we see in women in freedom movement is a very different, because they have a larger goal of fight against the colonial rule. The non-violent means of protest actions under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi ensured massive participation of women in national liberation movement. Women family members of Congress leaders gave up parda, participated in public functions, rallies, demonstrations, experienced prison life. Many families allowed women to take politically risky jobs such as taking part in picketing or demonstrations, and they emerged eventually as powerful leaders. Some of the highly educated women joined educational institutions and diplomatic corps in the post-independence period. Many of them became public servants. They worked for the private sectors and industries, and rest of them became enlightened homemakers with a strong commitment to educating their daughters. The journey that began in the 19th century social reform movement and culminated with the 20th century freedom movement resulted in securing constitutional guarantees of equality, freedom, equal opportunity for women irrespective of their class, caste, creed, race and religion. So this was a very important achievement that Indian women did not get everything on plateau. They also they had to struggle for it. Swadeshi movement during 1905 to 8, in which women's participation in the nationalist activities became very massive. Many of the wives, sisters and daughters of male political activists started forming support groups for the movement. Middle class nationalism inspired women and girls who gave away jewelry as well as money for the national freedom. A handful of them also made a major contribution. They also formed samitis and women became very active in this kind of Swadeshi activities. They also created various organizations and they became very street fighters, and many of them also fought against the British administration. British administration came down heavily and no women were chosen by on women. They used lathi charge against women. When Dandi march was to take place, Gandhiji had not listed a single woman for the march out of 71 marchers. Even for salt satyagraha, women were not selected by Gandhiji. Women freedom fighters like Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Khurshid Nauroji, Margaret Cousins, they protested strongly against Gandhiji. But Gandhiji remained firm on his decision and arguing that he had allocated greater role to women than mere breaking the salt law. But Sarojini Naidu defied and joined the march at Dandi at the final stage and was the first woman to be arrested in the movement. Once the defiance cleared the path, thousands of women joined salt satyagraha, faced lathi charge, courted arrest. This is generally remembered as first time in the history of Indian civilization that masses of Indian women got involved in the struggle, and this is for independence of India. Brave and committed women freedom fighters were Kasturba Gandhi, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Neil Sengupta, Basanti Devi, Rokeya Sakawat Hussain, and Aruna Asraf Ali. And we have seen that even tribal women, Dalit women, they were also very active in the freedom movement. Tribal women in Gujarat took part in Salt Satyagraha, that no tax campaign in the 1930s in Gujarat and in Bengal, were leading tenant struggles like Tribaga movement in the 40s in Bengal. In the hills of Nagaland, where Rani became familiar in terms of civil obedience movement. She got involved in very early at the age of 13 and inspired by her cousin, who was active in mobilizing villagers in Manipur. In 1931-32, she joined No Tax campaign and also she took over the leadership of this whole movement against British colonial rule. This process empowered women in the second wave of feminism, because these women who were active in second wave of feminism, they had heard stories of heroic contribution that their foremothers had made. The second wave of women's movement is known as women's rights movement. Women have developed self-reliance. No one could empower other. They believe that you have to fight against your own enemies. There cannot be any substitute. During freedom movement, women gained confidence due to participation in the larger political struggles. In the process, they gave up parda, they embraced modernity, they demanded right to vote, and were eventually guaranteed by Constitution of India after gaining independence of the country. So this second wave had its roots in the first wave of feminism and also in the social reform movement. In the second wave of feminism that began in the mid-70s, educated middle class women were actively involved in different social movements of the students, youth, workers, peasants, tribals, Dalits, civil liberties, and also played very important central role in those movements. They abhorred paternalism of benevolent males and upper class women's charitable, quote unquote charitable or quote unquote philanthropic social work, and declared themselves as fighters for women's rights. Women's rights movement in the post-75 period brought to the fore a wide range of women's concerns. There had been various ideological shades in the women's movement coexisting till then. The earlier women's organizations were perceived to have an elitist bias by the newly formed autonomous women's groups. To them, these were privileged women from good family, quote unquote good families, that did some philanthropic or social work activities for the common, poor, miserable women. So they were up there and these common women were down below, which perpetuated the unequal relations and didn't transcend the existing social order. Feminists also averred that the conventional women's organizations abided by the rules of the caste system in their personal lives, and they were generally oriented towards maintaining the status quo. In the last 4 decades, say from 1980 to 2010, what we see is that there are more and more marginalized sections, women from Dalits and tribals and industrial workers, agricultural workers, poor women, peasant women in rural and urban areas. They have mobilized against violence against women in the community or in the family. They have fought against witch hunting, they have supported women headed households, they have fought against rape and dowry murders and variety of acid attacks and domestic violence. And members of these new autonomous women's groups believe to fight against all forms of sexual oppression and consider women as an oppressed sex. They believe, like casteism and communalism, sexism is one of the most effective weapons used by the ruling class to divide the masses. Hence, they believe in fighting against caste system, religious chauvinism, sexism simultaneously in their personal lives, and they practice non-discriminatory attitudes towards people from different religions, castes and classes. Personal is political is their slogan. The Indian feminists believe that economic independence of women is a minimum necessary condition for women's liberation, but it is not enough. One has to fight for women's rights in socio-cultural, educational and political fields to achieve total liberation. Many of those members of women's rights groups call themselves feminist. They do not like the term social worker for themselves. Those who believe in legal provisions can change the women's position are known as liberal feminist. Those who consider man as responsible for the plight of women and patriarchy as a central contradiction in the human civilization are known as radical feminists, and those who situate women's oppression in the overall socio-economic and cultural reality are known as socialist feminists. Socialist feminists believe in establishing linkages between the women's movement and the broader socio-political movements by the working in collaboration with various types of mass organizations such as trade unions, democratic rights organizations, issue-based united fronts, and they think that women's demands have to be fought on a day-to-day basis. You can't postpone women's question. Then only new ethos, new ideologies, new morality, new egalitarian relations between man and women can be evolved. Dalit feminists such as Urmila Pawar, Kumud Pavde, Baby Kamble from Maharashtra, Cynthia Stephen and Ruth Manorama from Karnataka, Bama in Tamil Nadu, they have captured the conscientization of Dalit women under the leadership of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. We have seen that large scale of issues and the gamut of problems which the women's movement over these three movements have taken place: 19th century social reform movement, 20th century freedom movement and current new women's rights movement, and they have qualitatively changed the women's agenda. They have brought women from the margin to the center stage, and women's question has been fought. All of them believe that without women's liberation, we can't liberate the humanity, and women's liberation cannot be fought in isolation. Liberation of humankind is a must for women's liberation. Thus, in conclusion, we can say that the learnings of Bhakti movement, social reform movement, freedom movement and the new women's rights movement are very important, that without human liberation we can't attain women's liberation, and women's liberation is very intrinsically linked with struggle against all form of hierarchies, injustice, subjugation and oppression. So we have to have women's liberation along with the liberation of humankind. Thank you.